In our headlines on this Wednesday, April 23rd, here in South Korea, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok is in Washington, D.C. for a host of trade talks under multilateral and bilateral frameworks amid a lower growth forecast of 1% this year for South Korea by the IMF. The number of newborns here in South Korea rose for the 8th month in a row this past February, up over 3% on year, which in turn raised the country's fertility rate to 0.82 on year. Meanwhile, at the Vatican, the body of the late Pope Francis will lie in state at St. Peter's Basilica starting Wednesday until Friday evening, and his funeral will take place on Saturday morning. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok is in Washington, D.C., and upon arrival there, he pledged to promote dialogue that will advance the bilateral alliance. Kim Jong-shil has our top story.
South Korea's Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok has arrived in Washington, D.C. for trade talks with the U.S. The discussions are set to begin at 8 a.m. local time on Thursday. This marks the highest-level visit by a South Korean official since the start of the Trump administration's second term.
We are here to initiate discussions that will further strengthen the South Korea-U.S. alliance. I will share the results of our talks on Thursday.
Choi's visit comes amid rising trade tensions, with the U.S. imposing reciprocal tariffs which will be imposed after a 90-day grace period, as well as 25% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automobiles. Trade Minister An Deok-keun, on his way to Washington, expressed his commitment to addressing these issues.
In sectors like automobiles, where the 25% tariff has caused significant damage, we will work to find a solution as quickly as possible.
Minister An also mentioned that they're prepared for the possibility of a surprise appearance by President Trump, as seen in recent U.S.-Japan negotiations. The ministers will join discussions with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. The talks are expected to cover a broad range of issues, including the trade imbalance, non-tariff barriers like U.S. beef import restrictions, and even defense cost-sharing.
We are moving at Trump speed to ensure these deals are made on behalf of the American worker and the American people.
Experts in Seoul advise South Korea to take a measured approach for a better long-term deal.
We don't know if what Trump wants today, it'll be the same tomorrow. He may ask additional things in the near future. We want to make sure that if there is a deal, then it's a complete deal.
The expert also cautioned that the U.S. may be seeking a quick win for President Trump, which could lead to rushed decisions. With so much at stake, the outcome of Thursday's talks is being closely watched. Kim Jong-shil, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in what appears to be an attempt aimed at appeasing market anxiety, U.S. President Donald Trump has reaffirmed prospects of a trade deal with China and rejected prospects of replacing the head of the Federal Reserve. Lee Soo-jin covers his latest remarks.
U.S. President Donald Trump is moving to ease investor concerns, highlighting optimism over trade talks with China while dismissing reports that he plans to fire Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. Speaking to reporters in the Oval Office on Tuesday local time, Trump emphasized that trade talks with Beijing were, quote, going well, and added once again that he maintains a good relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
My relationship with President Xi is great. It's been great for a long time. We've had a very good relationship, and I think we'll make a deal with China. If we don't make a deal, we'll set it. We'll just set the number.
He also acknowledged that the current 145% tariff on Chinese goods was high, but said that while this will be reduced substantially, it will not be eliminated entirely. The Trump administration is actively ramping up trade talks, with the White House press secretary saying his trade team would meet with 34 countries just this week and that 18 trade proposals were currently undergoing reviews.
As I mentioned, there have now been 18 proposals in more than 100 countries around the world who are wanting to make a deal with the United States of America. So we feel everyone involved wants to see a trade deal happen.
When Trump was asked whether he had plans to fire Powell, he said he, quote, never did.
The press runs away with things. No, I have no intention of firing him. I would like to see him be a little more active in terms of his idea to lower interest rates.
This marks a sharp departure from Trump's recent pressure on the Fed chair to cut interest rates last lowered in December. Just a day earlier, he escalated his criticism on Truth Social, calling Powell a quote major loser and suggesting he might remove him before his term ends in May 2026. Markets responded positively to his most recent remarks, with major U.S. stock indexes closing significantly higher on Tuesday, rebounding from Monday's steep sell-off triggered by Trump's criticism of Powell. 이수진, Arirang News.
Well, regardless of that rebound on Wall Street, the International Monetary Fund says economic expansion this year will slow sharply for most countries, including South Korea, as U.S. tariffs take their toll. Moon Hye-ryan has details.
The International Monetary Fund has sharply lowered its forecast for South Korea's economic growth amid rising trade tensions and heightened policy uncertainty. In its latest economic outlook, the IMF now expects the economy to grow by just 1% in 2025, a full percentage point lower than its January projection. The estimate was presented in the report's appendix without further commentary, with the IMF's forecast the lowest among projections for South Korea from major institutions. The Korea Development Institute forecast a growth of 1.6% for the year, while the OECD and the Bank of Korea's projections came in at 1.5%. However, the BOK said last week, following its Monetary Policy Committee meeting, that it was likely to cut its economic growth projection as it expects growth in the first quarter of the year to be lower than previously estimated. The IMF also revised down its global forecast by 0.5 percentage points. The revised outlook, with the expectation that the world economy will grow by 2.8%, reflects what the agency describes as a new high in uncertainties spurred by escalating trade tensions. In response to these volatile conditions, the IMF introduced a new forecasting method. Alongside baseline projection based on data available as of early April, the outlook includes two alternative scenarios that account for key tariff-related developments. Prior to the new tariff announcement by the United States on April 2nd, global growth was projected at 3.2%, factoring in high oil prices and U.S. trade policy. After tariff suspensions and retaliatory measures on April 9th, the forecast dropped to 2.8%, suggesting that gains from delayed tariffs are outweighed by slower growth in the U.S. and China. The U.S. saw one of the biggest downward revisions, with 2025 growth now forecast at 1.8%, down 0.9 percentage points, while China's growth forecast was also lowered to 4%. To mitigate the growing risks, the IMF recommended working toward a more predictable trade environment through regional and multilateral agreements, and stressed the importance of balanced monetary policy to maintain financial stability and anchor inflation expectations. Moon Hye-ryan, Arirang News.
In other news, more babies were born in Korea this past February on year, maintaining a promising upward trend for the 8th month in a row. Shin Se-byul covers its latest findings.
South Korea reported a rise in the number of newborns for the 8th consecutive month in February. According to Statistics Korea's data on Wednesday, a total of 20,035 babies were born in February 2025, a 3.2% increase from the same month last year. This marks the first time in 11 years that the number of births in February has gone up compared to the previous year. But the pace of growth slowed from January, when the country recorded its highest childbirth growth in recent years at 11.6%. The country's total fertility rate, the average number of children a woman is expected to have during her lifetime, also saw a slight on-year increase. It came in at 0.82, up 0.05 from a year earlier, with gains seen across all age groups, from women aged 24 and under to those in their 40s and beyond. The number of marriages also continued to climb, with 19,370 couples tying the knot in February, marking a 14.3% on-year increase and the 11th straight month of growth, the longest upward streak since records began. Meanwhile, the number of divorces dipped slightly, down 0.1% from a year earlier. Despite the positive signs in the number of newborns and marriages, one expert cautioned that the recent uptick may be a short-term trend driven more by demographic timing than a fundamental shift.
We're seeing postponed births from the pandemic now taking place, and a large cohort of people currently in their prime age for marriage and childbirth. But that doesn't mean today's young generation is more inclined to get married or have children. So it's too soon to say this is a true upward trend.
He added that fundamental issues like soaring housing costs, job insecurity, and the high cost of private education must be tackled to see lasting change. Meanwhile, despite the rise in birth and marriages, the country still recorded a natural population decline. With 30,283 deaths reported in February, a 1.3% increase on year, the population shrank by 10,248. 신세벽, Arirang News.
On the political front, the Democratic Party is hosting its second debate on this Wednesday, while the race with the People Power Party has been reduced to 4 contenders. I have our correspondent Kim Do-yeon live on the line with the latest. Do-yeon, welcome. Let's start with the events taking place at the Democratic Party.
Sunny, the Democratic Party of Korea's 3 presidential primary contestants are currently in a second debate discussing a wide variety of topics. 3 topics were posed to the 3 candidates their thoughts on the ongoing insurrectional allegations, the livelihood economy, and inter-Korean relations. At the moment, each candidate is picking their own topic to discuss with others. This comes as the second half of voting started for the primary today as well, and while the frontrunner Lee Jae-myung has 90% of the votes so far, Kim Dong-yeon and Kim Kyung-soo are looking to turn things around. In fact, what's known as the Honam region, consisting of the Jeollado provinces and Gwangju City, started voting, while the voting also opens for the capital region, Gangwon-do province, and Jeju Island tomorrow. These regions are where around 80% of the electors are from. So despite its frontrunner Lee Jae-myung racking up the 90% of votes so far, there are votes to turn things around. Candidates one by one, with voting in these regions coming up, have shared their pledges of how they would develop these regions.
Right, I see. And what's the latest at the primary election of the People Power Party, Do-yeon?
Well, Sunny, the People Power Party started its second round as well. Kim Moon-soo, An Cheol-soo, Han Dong-un, and Hong Jun-pyo a couple of hours ago came together for a media day to kick off the series of debates for this round. There will be one-on-one debates, 2 on Thursday and 2 on Friday, and each contestant picked a debate partner. Kim Moon-soo picked Han Dong-un for their first debate on Thursday, and An picked Kim Moon-soo for the second debate on Thursday. Han Dong-un and Hong Jun-pyo picked each other, making their debate a 3-hour-long one on Friday. On Saturday, there will be a 4-way debate as well. The matchup brings together a pro-impeachment contestant and an against-impeachment contestant, with An and Han being pro-impeachment and Kim and Hong being against. Do keep in mind that this round cutoff, for which the results come on April 29th, will be decided with 50% of eligible PPP voters and 50% on open survey. If a candidate gets more than 50% of the total, there won't be a runoff.
Right, I see. No runoff. Good to know then. All right, and thank you for the latest on the partisan primaries ahead of Korea's presidential election. Over at the Vatican, the funeral of Pope Francis will take place on Saturday morning local time, and starting Wednesday, his body lies in state at St. Peter's Basilica. An Sung-jin reports.
Pope Francis lies in a wooden coffin, wearing a red robe with a papal mitre on his head and a rosary held in his hands. Unlike his predecessors who were placed in a triple coffin, the Pope remains in a wooden coffin, which reflects the humble life he led. On Wednesday morning local time, the procession left the chapel of Santa Marta, the Pope's residence in the Vatican, to St. Peter's Basilica. It passed through Santa Marta Square and the square of the Roman proto-martyrs. Cardinal Kevin Farrell, Camerlengo of the Holy Roman Church, was in charge of the rite of translation, the process of translating liturgical texts. Large crowds gathered to mourn the Pope's death, carrying flowers and crosses while some prayed. The late Pope's body will be taken into the Basilica of St. Mary Major for entombment, but until then will remain in an open coffin until Friday at St. Peter's Basilica for mourners who wish to pay their respects before the funeral mass. The Vatican has confirmed that the Pope's funeral will take place on Saturday in St. Peter's Square. Royals and world leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen have confirmed their attendance. Once the mourning period is over, conclave, the process of electing the new pope, will begin. Corriere della Sera, one of Italy's oldest and most read newspapers, placed South Korea's first prefect of the Vatican's dicastery for the clergy, Cardinal Lazarus Yuhung-sik, as a potential successor. The newspaper described Yu as a member of the Folklore movement who sought reconciliation between the two Koreas. Pope Francis appointed 80% of the cardinals who will pick the next pope. Though several contenders have been brought up, it is more likely to be narrowed down in the coming days. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is visiting Russia this week for talks with President Vladimir Putin about ending Russian aggression against Ukraine. The upcoming meeting will mark the fourth between the two in recent times, aimed at advancing a peace deal between Moscow and Kyiv. Now, separately, officials from the U.S., UK, France, Germany and Ukraine are set to sit down in London on Wednesday for similar talks. As part of efforts to halt the hostilities, some sources say the U.S. may suggest formal recognition of Russia's annexation of Crimea, a suggestion that Ukraine has already rejected. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday emphasized that he was willing to talk with Russia but would reject recognition of Russia's occupation of Crimea. Back here on the local front, Acting President Han Duck-soo reaffirmed commitment to advancing the ROK-U.S. alliance during his visit to the Combined Forces Command at Camp Humphreys, that is, in Pyeongtaek earlier on this Wednesday. He sat down with Commander Xavier Brunson of U.S. Forces Korea and stressed the importance of maintaining a strong readiness posture. He also thanked troops deployed to fight the recent wildfires in the southeastern part of the country. A forum here in Seoul has brought together dozens of diplomatic and defense experts, including former U.S. government officials, to discuss regional security and stability under a second Trump administration. Our correspondent Oh Seong covers the event.
Nuclear deterrence and alliances should not be neglected but bolstered by the United States as geopolitical tensions and global conflicts continue 3 months into the second Trump administration. That's according to officials and experts at the annual Asan Plenum in Seoul. As concerns grow over the lack of messaging on Washington's security commitment to its allies, Kurt Campbell, former US Deputy Secretary of State, raised the need for confidence building, noting North Korea's nuclear threat, Russia's potential use of nuclear weapons, and the largest nuclear buildup of modern times in China.
My own view is that over time we're going to need to do more, and we're going to need to involve our key allies, Japan and the ROK, more in decision-making around military and nuclear use, much in the way we did in Europe during parts of the Cold War.
Campbell also called for Seoul to have greater representation as an addition to the G7 or the Quad, saying its contributions to global governance are dearly valued. On trade concerns, as America rolls out reciprocal tariffs against its trading partners, the former diplomat expressed optimism towards the, quote, ingenuity and the determination by Seoul's trade officials who have travelled to Washington, D.C. for ministerial consultations this week.
Lots of discussions about enhanced technology and other investments in the United States. That's very welcome to the Trump administration. More defense engagement, but also work in areas that the United States clearly needs help. One of the areas of deepest concern is our challenges in shipbuilding, both civilian and military. It is the ROK that can help us, that can work with us in very productive partnerships.
The annual discussion comes amid the need for the Indo-Pacific security architecture to evolve to meet the challenges of a new era, especially at a time marked by competing visions of order and leadership in Northeast Asia.
Highlighting 80 years since the end of World War II that liberated South Korea from Japan's colonization, Seoul's Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol warned against naked self-interest that led to war in the past. As two key democratic players in the Indo-Pacific, Cho highlighted Seoul and Tokyo's dramatic improvement of relations over the past 3 years, saying their partnership is not a choice but a necessity. The two nations commemorate 60 years of normalizing bilateral ties this year. Amid the US-China rivalry, Cho said South Korea and Japan can encourage China's constructive role and prevent escalations in the region. Tokyo's ambassador to Seoul also called for continued trilateral cooperation with the US to strengthen deterrence and foster regional stability and prosperity. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, yesterday, April 22nd, was Earth Day, and in light of this occasion, we share with you the latest efforts by Seoul City to reduce single-use plastic waste at Hangang parks, where picnics are very popular. Our E&E files this report.
Having a picnic and enjoying food delivery, it's pure happiness, until we realize that our Earth can't sustain this convenience forever. And as more people begin to enjoy the outdoors after a long winter, starting this month, Seoul City is working to reduce single-use waste by installing return stations for reusable food delivery containers at Hangang parks, beginning with 2 at Dukseom Hangang Park and 3 at Yeouido Hangang Park. To use the service, the reusable container option in the delivery app needs to be selected. And to return containers, simply scan the QR code on the delivery bag and drop them at the designated station. Next, these used containers are taken to the cleaning station.
Reusable containers. One concern that probably comes to mind is sterilization. Can we really trust that they're clean? Well, that's exactly what we're here to find out. Behind me, a full 7-step process ensures that each container is washed, sanitized, and inspected before making its way back to customers.
The steps include pre-washing, soaking, high-temperature washing, rinsing, drying, sterilization, disinfection, and a comprehensive inspection.
We at It's Green run the Return It service, where the containers are collected, sanitized, and returned to participating restaurants and vendors for reuse up to 300 times.
To ensure the highest standards of hygiene, ATP tests are conducted to measure organic residue and are 10 times stricter than the standard guidelines.
Since the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, food delivery has become a regular part of life. To tackle the growing plastic waste issue, we partnered with major delivery companies in 2022 to launch a reusable container service. The service is now available in most areas of Seoul, and by next year, we plan to expand it to all of the city.
For business owners, what are the advantages and challenges of using this system?
The reusable containers are not only clean, but they also retain heat well, helping to keep the food warm during delivery. However, it would be even more practical if the containers came in a wider range of shapes and materials to better suit the food.
As more services take part in helping protect the planet, our role is just as important. By recognizing the impact of our daily choices and by participating, we can become part of the change we hope to see. Lee, Arirang News.
Unlike yesterday's rain and wind, the sunny spring weather has completely returned today. Seoul and Jeonju reached 24 degrees, Daejeon 25 degrees, feeling a little hot today. It will be as warm as 20 degrees in Seoul tomorrow with clear skies. With these warm conditions, you might wonder if the ultrafine dust or fine dust will appear again. Looking at the ultrafine dust forecast tomorrow, we'll have good levels all over the country. It will be perfect to enjoy outdoor activities. However, from tomorrow night, cold air moves south from the northeast, and the temperature in Seoul on Friday will drop to 7 degrees. Tomorrow, Seoul will start off at 11 degrees, Chuncheon and Gyeongju at 9 degrees. Highs will move up to 20 degrees in Seoul and Busan, 26 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. Strong winds are expected nationwide from tomorrow. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session.